Hey y'all, before we get into this episode, I wanted to go ahead and add a trigger warning. We'll be covering some really heavy topics such as violence, so please prepare your hearts and minds accordingly.
The revolution will not be televised, and be no rerun, brothers and sisters. The revolution will be live.
What's up, y'all, and welcome back to another episode of DEI Diaries with your host, EP. Now that we are 3 episodes into the Black History Unfiltered series, it's time that we take a deeper dive into Black history. The history that is rarely taught in schools, but it is extremely important for us to know and never forget. Many of us are familiar with the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre, and that's a good thing. But unfortunately, there were many massacres and lynchings happening all around the country that were just like it. And today, we're going to talk about it. In Hickman, Kentucky, there was a beautiful and thriving family named the Walker family. The Walker family was a family that had a husband named David Walker, a wife named Annie Walker, and many beautiful children. Scholars suggest that they had around 5 or 6 children. Local news sources describe the Walker family as not only beautiful, but also successful too. They owned 21.5 acres of farmland, and the land had been purchased from the West Tennessee Land Company. Now, the locals like to use the land for fishing and farming, and the acquisition and sale of the land angered many of the locals. In September of 1908, David Walker had been accused of slander against Flora Long, a white woman who was also a resident of Hickman. Now, I had to go down a deep rabbit hole of what slander even meant in this case, and supposedly he was accused of cursing at her, which is very interesting just how common these types of accusations were during this time period. For example, in 1889, a young black boy named Orion Owen Anderson, who was only 14 years old at the time, allegedly wore a sack on his head and frightened a young white girl on her walk to school. Though there were no witnesses around and the girl could not identify who had scared her, Anderson was arrested after a sack was found near him. He was placed in jail, and later reports claimed he confessed to attempting to frightening her. But I also wanted us to keep in mind that many intimidation tactics could have possibly been used to gain a confession. On November 8, 1889, a group of 40 white men rode into Leesburg, Virginia on horseback. 3 of the men gained entry into the jail by pretending that they had a prisoner who had to be admitted. Once they were inside, they took Anderson from his jail cell, y'all, carried him to a railroad, hung him, and shot him numerous of times. The members of the mob were seen riding through town on horseback afterward, but no one tried to apprehend them. Anderson was later buried in the town cemetery for people who were essentially unknown or those who were poor. I want us to keep in mind that these horrific accusations and lynchings were used to intimidate, punish, and control politically, economically, and socially. Now, David, on the other hand, was actually found not guilty of the crime of slander towards Flora Long. However, this angered the local night riders. Hey, are you enjoying this episode so far? If so, please do not forget to give me a big thumbs up, a like, a comment, and please do not forget to subscribe. Now back to the episode. Before we move on, what is a night rider anyway? A night rider is a member of a secret band who ride masked at night, doing acts of violence for the purpose of punishing or terrorizing. After doing my research, I noticed this term was used to describe those who enacted violence on African American citizens as well as African American farmers. By the spring of 1908, the Night Riders had established themselves in western Kentucky not only as the soldiers of tobacco wars against farmers, but these enforcement efforts included racially motivated crimes designed to rid local communities of African American farmers and laborers who essentially competed against white people in the tobacco markets and in the job market in general. Remember, it didn't seem like the community was very happy that the Walker family acquired some of that land. Now, following David Walker's trial regarding slander against Flora Long, on October the 3rd, 1908, night riders approached the Walker home. According to some scholarly journals, they suggest the night riders called for David to come outside to get whipped, but he refused to comply. The night riders then used coal oil to set the cabin house on fire. The Walkers and several of his children ran outside. The mob opened fire on the family as they ran from the burning home, shooting David Walker, who died instantly, Andy Walker, and the children. The last remaining child of the Walker family did not leave the burning house and is believed to have died in the fire, though scholars suggest there is no evidence that his body was found or that he possibly escaped the scene. Following the murder of the Walker family, the governor of Kentucky released a statement offering a $500 reward for the apprehension of anyone involved in the murder. Many news outlets blamed the Walker family, claiming they were uppity Negroes, and some news articles even described the Walker family as bad Negroes to justify their murders. Few, if any, of the murderers were brought in, and the murder went unpunished. Now, I know this history lesson was extremely heavy, but it is important, especially when you consider the ties between Black people, extreme violence, racism, and land ownership. Black farmland ownership, which peaked in 1910, has now decreased to less than 3 million acres of land today, and Black farmers represent just over 1% of all U.S. farmers. So understand why we need to know Black history, because it represents the inequities and lack of diversity that we still see even today. Well guys, that concludes lesson 3 of our Black History Unfiltered series. I hope you really enjoyed this episode, and I would love to hear your thoughts, and I'd also like to hear how this episode made you feel. Remember, DEI Diaries is a safe space. Until next time.
Subscribe.
The revolution will not be televised, and be no rerun, brothers and sisters. The revolution will be live.